The Trump administration continues to face fallout from its handling of the Jeffrey Epstein files, including from both chambers of Congress. A bipartisan group of senators is calling for a probe into the Justice Department's redactions of the files, accusing the Trump administration of violating the Epstein Files Transparency Act and re-victimizing survivors. And the House Oversight Committee Chairman James Comer said this week that they are moving quickly to schedule depositions from Attorney General Pam Bondi and Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick. This all comes as the committee held a closed-door deposition with Epstein's long-time accountant Richard Kahn. Kahn told members that several high-profile figures transferred large sums of money to the convicted sex offender, but claimed he was not aware of the nature or extent of Epstein's abuse of so many women until after Epstein's death. He also claimed he had no personal relationship with Epstein. And next week, Epstein's personal lawyer, Darren Endike, will testify before the committee. He and Kahn are co-executors of Epstein's estate. Joining us now, a member of the House Oversight Committee, Democratic Congressman James Walkinshaw of Virginia. It's so fascinating that this man was doing all of this in bright sunlight and so many people, nobody know anything. I want to play something from James Comer on how long he thinks the House Epstein investigation will continue. Let's play that.
How long do you think it's going to last if you finish it by the end of this Congress?
Well, that's our goal, and I certainly hope so. I hope it's before the end of the Congress. But as we all see, anytime more documents are released or more testimonies given, it seems like more cans of worms are opened.
I think the American people do deserve an answer to that. How long is this going to go on? I imagine Democrats will, if they take back the House, you guys may continue this. Mm-hmm. But at the end of the day, are we learning anything that can bring some actual accountability?
Well, I don't think the investigation can begin to end until we have all the files released, right? Chairman Comer's talking about cans of worms. Half of the cans or half of the worms are still locked up. We don't know. So we got to get all the files out. We got to get the illegal redactions unredacted, and then we got to follow every lead that comes from that. I don't know how long that will take. Obviously, we want to move as quickly as we can, but we got to have all of the information before we can determine what the timeline is.
Are you guys getting anywhere with all of the documents coming out?
No, I don't think we've seen a lot of progress on that. However, I do think we'll start to get somewhere when we depose the Attorney General Pam Bondi shortly. And Chairman Comer has said he wants to bring her in as quickly as possible. He didn't want to bring her in. Mm-hmm. She's coming in only because there was a vote to force a subpoena to bring her in. He didn't try to bring her in. And look, she's going to have to answer hard questions about why the files haven't been released. They missed the deadline. I'm not going to say the cover-up is worse than the crime, because these crimes are horrific. Yeah. But the cover-up itself is a crime, in my view. She's going to have to answer questions about that.
And just to add on to that, our colleague Lisa Rubin reported yesterday that among the missing documents from these files is still notes and memos reflecting interviews with women alleging abuse by other prominent men. But, Congressman, if you guys do take back the majority and you have subpoena power come January, are you going to subpoena Donald Trump to come and testify before Congress?
I support subpoenaing Donald Trump to come and testify. I think, especially given the Clinton depositions that we went through and the precedent that was established there, where not only did Chairman Comer say, you got to come in, but you got to come in when I say you got to come in under the circumstances I say. That set a strong precedent. There's no reason President Trump shouldn't be held to the same standard. And he had a much longer, more in-depth relationship with Epstein than either of the Clintons did.
Is that something that your Democratic colleagues are in concurrence with?
I think so. Yeah. I mean, I think Democrats on the committee have been saying for months now that President Trump should come in and answer questions. Do I expect that a President Trump will cooperate with a Democratic-controlled committee or Congress? Probably not. He didn't with the January 6th committee, so that will be a battle. But look, presidents of the United States have testified before Congress and answered questions before Congress before throughout our history a number of times. There's no reason that it can't happen here. And I think if I were President Trump, who claims to have been exonerated by the information that's been released thus far, couldn't be further from the truth. But if you really are exonerated, if you really are innocent, come in and answer questions just as the Clintons did.
If I was him, I'd want to get in front of everybody like, I don't know this man. I don't know the nasty rapist man. I'm not friends with him.
Congressman, a multi-part question. First, back to the Pam Bondi hearing, which hasn't been scheduled yet. Is there a time, is Chairman Comer bound by some kind of rules that say he must call a hearing within X number of days?
No.
So he could drag this out for as long as he wants?
He could.
Second, the work of the committee, if there is a Democratic majority after this midterm elections, does the work of the House Oversight Committee automatically continue, but the majorities just flip? Or would you have to do some sort of reconstitution of the committee and its work in this realm?
The subpoenas will expire when the Congress ends. So new subpoenas will need to be issued. I think certainly with respect to subpoenas that have been issued related to the Epstein investigation, I think Democrats will want to continue and perhaps expand those subpoenas. For example, the Department of Justice is under subpoena, separate from the legislation to release the files. They're out of compliance with that subpoena. I think we're going to want to reissue that and ensure its compliance and use all the tools Congress has to do that.
I want to get to this upcoming testimony by the prison guard that was on duty during his death. I want to read a little bit some of the notes here from our producer, Jonathan Hellman. In one of the FBI documents released by the DOJ as part of the Epstein file release, it was mentioned that the prison guard was Googling the latest on Epstein in jail multiple times on the morning of his death. When asked by investigators, she said she didn't remember doing that search. Was also one of the two people prosecuted in 2019 for falsifying documents, claiming to have checked on Epstein the night he committed suicide. The charges were dropped in 2021 deferred prosecution agreement. What is the first question that you have for this prison guard?
The first question I will have for the prison guard is, did you or any other prison guards, to your knowledge, receive protection payments from Jeffrey Epstein? Another thing that's been reported recently is that she had a $5,000 bank deposit in the days before Epstein's death. There's been reporting by the Miami Herald that he was paying protection payments to prison guards. That's unproven, but I think that's an important line of questioning to understand what happened and what went wrong there. The 2023 DOJ OIG report outlined a series of procedural failings from the prison. It didn't get into this issue of payments that prison guards like her might have received, why they received those payments. Did those payments stop at some point? Was there any connection between those payments or lack of them and Epstein's death?
Do you believe that Jeffrey Epstein committed suicide?
I don't know. I don't know.
Are you going to ask her whether or not she's complicit in his death in any way? Is that something?
I think that absolutely that'll be a question that will be asked of her. Yeah.
You want to bring Jackie with you?
Yeah, I'm saying Jackie. I'd be terrified to be a part of Jackie. Absolutely not.
I know. Which there's no evidence of
shenanigans.
That's right. I think at this point there are a lot of questions that need to be answered, and the payments are new. The OIG did not have or did not report knowledge of those payments. We need to understand that.
Congressman James Walkinshaw, as always, thank you very much for coming to The Weekend.